Good day, students, and welcome to another lecture on research methodology in history. Today, we will be learning about the history of intimate relationships. The words intimacy and love are terms that are often used casually, but in history and the social sciences, they come loaded with layers of meaning and implications. Thus, Anne Brooks comments that any history that tries to trace the interweaving of love and intimacy must look at a myriad of social, economic, and cultural influences. Romantic love, or even romance itself, is seen as a culturally specific discourse which emerged in the medieval West as an alternative to conventional marriage. It involved an idealization of love. Writings by scholars like Shumway and Anne Laura Stoller indicate how intimacy came to be attached both to love and to sex and sexual relationships. However, it is not possible for us to trace the multiple genealogies of intimacy in this discussion only. Rather, we shall see how intimacy, which is understood as love in intimate relationships, has been traced throughout history, both in India and in the West. So, first we will be looking at the concept of love in India. Love is a universal feeling, having a presence in all cultures, but the ways in which it is understood, defined, and expressed are mediated by culture and language. Idioms of love are, by their very nature, plural and varied, and in Indian culture we find many variations. This plurality of the idioms of love and the way they have been understood, the way these understandings have overlapped and influenced each other, the ways in which the older idioms have been readapted and revitalized, all of these need to be studied. Many of these idioms originated in very different cultural environments, and therefore the ways in which they have overlapped, been transformed, and taken new forms also needs to be studied. The principal sources for such an Indian history of love are literary, not just of the creative flavor, such as poetry, prose, drama, but also writings on aesthetics, ethics, and art. These writings have found their place in various genres. But this placement is not accidental or a later classification imposed by the critic or the historian. Rather, it is the result of a conscious decision by the artist to place their writing as a poem, as a comedy, or as a treatise. Once chosen, genre decides not just the way in which the theme is presented, but also the way in which the audience will receive it. This discussion will concentrate on four genres: the Sanskrit and Prakrit genre, centering on Sringara and Kama idioms and comprising epics, lyrics, plays, stories, and treatises on philosophy, as well as conduct, that is to say, proper sexual conduct, and medicine. The oral genre of folk epics, tales, and songs, the Perso Arabic genre centering on the concepts of ishq and mohabbat, comprising religious injunctions, Sufi poems and interpretations, worldly texts on ethics and conduct, poetic romances like the Masnavis, eulogies and lyrics like ghazal, and stories of adventure and chivalry. And finally, the genre of devotional bhakti poetry and philosophy. There is also a modern genre of prem and love. So we start with the Sanskrit genre. In ancient India, sexual love and passion were seen as areas of social life rich with complex meaning and were valued as important for specific classes of people like the king, the householding couple, and the courtesan. The ascetic condemnation of love was not the mainstream. It was only one strand of tradition. The earliest writings in this genre are from the Prakrit dialect, and the continuity of this genre is immense, stretching from the ancient period to the 19th century. The epics are vital to this genre, being written at a time of social change when kingship was emerging and the Raja was transitioning from a chief to a king. Beauty and desire were often associated with the Raja, and this earned the admiration of womenfolk. The forms of marriage present in the epics showcase the shifting social customs over time as the epics span centuries. The woman choosing her husband or the swayamvar is deemed appropriate for princely brides, and marriage by mutual consent or the Gandharva form of marriage is lawful and fitting for a warrior and frequently takes place in the epic between a Raja and a woman of the forest outside the pale of settled society. There was a change in the depiction of love when the focus of narrative was urban, courtly society. Love was the focus of emotional and aesthetic sophistication, with desire and one's mastery of it being one of the major themes. With the rise of the Kavya form of literature in the 2nd century CE, we see the use of terms like rag, anurag, and bhakti to signify adoration, attachment, and affection. The king or the successful courtier had to attract love, but never fully fall in love himself, lest he lose his power. Another crucial figure was that of the courtesan, who taught manners, performed and authored discourses of love, and thus played a crucial role in the court. The philosophical basis for these discourses was the notion of kama, which could mean desire, sensory pleasure, or lust. While kama would come to be seen as the enemy of asceticism, it was also regarded as one of the three principal aims of man: artha or wealth, dharma or righteousness, and kama. Thus, there was an ambivalent attitude towards kama, as can be understood from the Manusmriti, which I will quote here. Acting out of desire is not approved of, but here on earth there is no such thing as no desire. For even studying the Veda and engaging in the rituals enjoined in the Veda are based upon desire. Desire is the very root of the conception of definite intention, and sacrifices are the result of that intention. Thus, we can see that karma was allowed but also warned against. It was thought to be especially dangerous in the first stage of life, that of the student, but was seen as appropriate in the second stage, that of the householder, where it could even be seen as duty. Sexual behavior is not excluded from the Shastras. Rather, prescriptive texts provide the courtly class with lessons on proper sexual conduct. The most famous of this is undoubtedly Vatsayana's Kama Sutra. It lectured the citizen about setting up a proper house, daily routine, and gave lessons on the proper kinds of women to have love affairs with, sexual advances, methods of intercourse, the proper way to get a wife, as well as the proper treatment of a wife, and proper conduct with courtesans was also laid out. It should be noted, however, that this was not a universal model, but one meant principally for the courtier, that is, a man of good birth, wealth, and appearance. And now we will come to the oral genre. The oral genre of tales, songs, and epics also make up an important part of the culture of India. The world of the oral epics is mainly masculine and male centered, with celibate and widowed women being seen as dangerous. There is a fear, even an aversion to the female form and to sex, with the virginal hero marrying, but almost immediately afterwards abandoning his wife to go and die in battle, with his wife later following him by committing sati. The exception to this is the romantic epic, which features a strong willed woman, often using trickery and deception. These are stories of individual transgression against group solidarity. A good example is the epic of Lorik and Chanda, which has two versions. In the first version, the martial qualities of the caste are celebrated, with the hero being the protector and his wife being chaste and submissive. The second, the romantic version, has the couple as lovers, with the heroine openly flirting with the hero and the story focusing on their elopement. Other features that turn up in the oral stories are the multiple wives of the hero and the way love is treated. In the male centered stories, while love is maybe the motivation, the woman is often secondary, being nothing but a prize to be won for marriage. However, in stories that center the woman, it is the heroine who saves or rescues the hero through her intelligence. Marriage is located at the beginning of the story, not at the end. Oral stories often contain explicitly misogynistic messages, showing women to be deceitful and duplicitous. A counterpoint is struck by women's songs and tales that speak of the woman's deep desire for love, affection, and security, and the lengths they have to go to ensure the continuity of these in a hostile patriarchal culture. Now we come to the Perso Arabic genre. This genre of literature and the conceptions of love it promoted, like ishq or muhabbat, has had a lasting impact on Indian civilization even up to the present day. There were no notions of asceticism in Islam. Married love and the need for sexual satisfaction were greatly valued, but the woman's sexuality was seen as chaotic and feared. Hence, efforts were made to control it and regulate it through the covering of the body and the contact between the sexes. Love was often perceived as a physical illness for which several remedies were indicated. A distinction was made between the two souls of man, the higher rational akal and the lower instinctual nafs. The words used for love in Arabic distinguished between muhabbat, connoting love between parents and children, and between God and believer, and love for honor, and ishq, a love exceeding muhabbat and held in particular for the beloved, though there was already a mystical meaning added to this. And finally, we have hawa or hawas, which is passion, which could denote a dangerous desire or lust that could turn a man away from God, though some secular writers have treated it as a synonym for ishq. Perso-Arabic writers on love made a further connection between love and madness and cautioned against love as something that could dangerously enslave one and threaten honor. Prescriptive texts for courtly conduct or adab tried to set out model codes of conduct regarding love. These were targeted towards an Indo Persian elite, and they saw love as a quest for nobility, virtue, and perfection. These texts encouraged pleasure, passion, and love, while also warning about control and restraint. The greatest repository for love in this genre was poetry, specifically the ghazal. Love was often the central organizing theme of the ghazal, and there was detailed exploration of love as an emotion, along with associated emotions like jealousy, pain, hope, and despair. It has been argued that ghazals were for a long time some of the most profound and powerful expressions of love in Indian culture, especially in the works of famous poets like Mir Taqi Mir and Ghalib. In the world of the ghazal, love's role is to soften the heart, make it more receptive to pain, and thus ultimately to the divine light. The final form within this genre was the Persian romance or the Masnavi. Extremely popular within India, this genre may have started off with the imported stories of Layla and Majnun, but with the intervention of celebrated poet Amir Khusrau, Indian stories came to be featured, like those of Heer and Ranjha, Mirza and Sahiba, etc. These romances were concerned with the conflict between love and family honor. In the Sufi configuration of these stories, which often adopted local legends, the human love or ishq was shown as a pathway to divine or real love. These stories went against the prevailing patriarchal order. The genre of love was recited by individuals, both men and women, who were denied autonomy in condition of extreme distress and in intimate contexts where there were no superiors in the family or social hierarchy was present. The poetry they recited expressed feelings of vulnerability, attachment, loss, anger, and bitterness. Poetry was the subversive, a defiance of the system, and a promise for freedom and autonomy. Finally, we come to devotional love. This arose from bhakti. Bhakti was characterized as the simple religion, as it requires little or no ritual beyond remembering God and His name, keeping one's mind firmly on Him, and singing and listening to His deeds, and as the religion of simple people, since God is supposed to love simple people because they are the ones devoid of pride. This path was juxtaposed against the path of knowledge and deemed to be the best method for achieving liberation. The strand of bhakti focused on the god Krishna, his days as a simple cowherd, and the devotion and love of the village women or the gopis for him. This love and devotion was prem, which was different from kama, as it was a total surrender of the self. Krishna Bhakti explored both the erotic love between Krishna and the gopis and the maternal love that his foster mother Yashoda felt for the child Krishna. Saints like Kabir, poet devotees who chose a god without personal attributes, also described their relationship with God in terms of viraho or love in separation, and expressed the religious experience as being pierced by the arrows of love. This basic emphasis on personal emotion externalized through song, so storytelling, and dance provided emotional freedom, expression, and agency. That was a transgression and a counterpoint to the standard social norm. Within the time space of a devotional song or the bhajan, or listening to the story, the ordinary devotee could flow along the stream of love, as it is often said, and plunge therefore into the depths of emotion. Thus, we have looked at some of the ways in which love and intimacy has been depicted in Indian culture. Now we must turn to the West. Simon May has argued that love as a universal force of desire and devotion has gone through four transformations. The first of these was the value of love. From the Old Testament to the Roman Empire, love became the supreme virtue as Christian scripture commanded that God be loved, and Jesus spoke of the love for God and for one's neighbor. The second transformation occurs from the 4th to the 16th century CE, where human beings are given the power to love, and love is seen as a gift of divine grace. Thus, human beings have the potential of becoming divine through love. The third transformation, which overlaps the second and starts from the 11th century, ending in the 18th, saw a human being becoming the object worthy of love that was formerly reserved for God. The fourth transformation started in the 18th century and saw the lover completing himself through love. He does not lose himself like in the bhakti tradition, but rather he finds himself. While this is one model of interpretation, or rather one way of looking at certain aspects of love in the West, there also exists detailed studies on the development of courtly love and romance, which rescued love from certain ascetic traits within Christianity and the Church. In the West, love and sexual desire are paired together. Love is directed towards the loved, the placing of the good of the beloved above one's own. Desire is self regarding, pleasure seeking. Thus, interestingly enough, this almost instinctual and commonsensical pairing is contradictory at its heart, but it is within this contradiction that a balance can be reached. True love can teach one to master selfish desire, and through self restraint, desire can be subordinated for the welfare of the beloved. And if love and desire are reciprocated, they both can be fulfilled in a benevolent way. This concept of romantic love originated in the 12th century CE through the development of courtly love in medieval culture. The male and female songwriters, known as the troubadours and the trouberides, were the first to speak of true love, or as it was known in southern France, fin amour. Love's mastery of desire, as discussed above, made possible true joy and satisfaction that far surpassed any relationship built on desire alone. This way of thinking spread quickly in Europe. This oppositional and yet balanced relationship between love and desire was a new invention, being entirely absent from the classics of Western culture, like the Iliad of Homer, the Aeneid of Virgil, from the poets like Sappho and Ovid, from the Greek romances, and even from the Norse sagas, or the English epics and the Celtic folklore. While the invention of this idea by troubadours has been well known in history, its significance and context was still a matter of historical debate. To understand this aspect, it is necessary to understand the Gregorian reform movement within the Christian church in Europe. This movement caused the acceptance among churchmen and church leaders of the idea that sexual desire was a type of appetite. This idea was built on older theology. 4th century ideas theorized that original sin within Christianity weakened reason and made one vulnerable to temptation. Chief among these dangerous temptations were those that, and here I quote, stimulated the appetite of sexual desire. These ideas, however, had remained confined to narrow theological circles for centuries, having little to no influence on church policy or governance. Church leaders negotiated with lay elites and adopted permissive approaches to many practices that might have violated these strict theological notions. But the Gregorian reform movement in the 11th and 12th centuries saw the reawakening of an interest in asceticism, and there was now a reformulation of church doctrine and policy, where an extreme conception of sexual desire as appetite was accepted, and efforts were made to basically outlaw sexual pleasure for Christians. This very ambitious effort taught that any feeling of sexual desire, even within a Christian marriage, was sinful. Any form of sexual touch was polluting. Even if the act of sex was without pleasure and thus without sin, it could still taint the soul. The formulation of fin amour by the Trouberides and troubadours was thus against this extreme view of conduct. It was a rejection of the church notion that all forms of sexual desire rose from the concept of desire as appetite. To them, this notion was far too narrow and inadequate to describe the full range of emotions and feelings that consisted of true love. While they conceded that desire as appetite could and did exist, true love helped to govern and even master its selfish and dangerous tendencies. Love, thus, was not a pathway to sin. On the contrary, it was a remedy, a guardian that could protect the soul of the lover. Courtly love thus represented a radical descent from the Gregorian reform's vision of cosmic order. Courtly love treated the strict Christian regulation of sexuality as a threat, as a source of testing that could also bring tragic separation and death to lovers. Defying Christian theological doctrine, lovers proved that their love was not mere appetite. They rejected sexual advances from alternative partners. They resisted capture and abduction. In some instances, they even refused the beloved until she or he had been tested and proven to be true. If, in the end, true lovers were able to secretly enjoy each other's love in peace for one night or even for a lifetime, they experienced the highest earthly form of happiness, a happiness far higher than any sexual gratification, a happiness that was in no way a stage or a bridge to some higher spiritual state, but existed for its own sake. Thus, courtly love existed in a world similar in structure to the world of Christian theology. But in this other world, love opened up a separate conduit of spiritual influence in the world and within the body. And now we can come to our conclusion. This study of love in history is by necessity abbreviated. However, it does raise some important points. Throughout history, both in India and in the West, love operated both within and outside dominant mainstream traditions. Thus, in India, while love was maybe accepted and prescribed within the Shastras, when it came to the daily lives of the common man, it was often an act of subversion against the patriarchal society. Both in India and in the West, love within the religious paradigm whether it be bhakti or biblical love as commanded by Jesus, was not just accepted, but in some cases it was commanded. Those same religious traditions, particularly in the West, saw love as dangerous and tried to proscribe it, causing acts of defiance and resistance that redefined love as something pure and benevolent. Thus, clearly, love has always been at the heart of human cultural consciousness. It has been controversial, caused debates and disruption, but it has never truly been banished or excluded. Thank you.